What's up, Don Manning? Good to have you on the show, brother.
Absolutely thrilled to be here, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet, man. All right. So whenever I get to know a new man here and I feel so blessed to have amazing men like yourself come into my life, come on this show. But I have to ask, whenever I know how many kids a guy has, and then I know the work it takes for four, but you've got seven.
I
Seven,
do.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Seven
And I'll
kids
tell you something else that's funny. I have four girls and then three boys. So
in that
at
order,
one
right?
time, it was me and five women in my house. So you think about that. I mean, it was because, and we have a bit of a blended family. My wife brought a 2-year-old to the marriage. So we immediately were married, became a father. And the reason I say all that is because it really made me, I was like, dude, I don't know what I'm doing. I got a bunch of women. I don't know how to deal with them, and it really I want to. It made me just say I got to figure this out, and that's really the genesis of Crazy Cool Family. Is that when I was in that mode, that first decade of parenting, and for any guy that's got either a bunch of daughters or a bunch of kids or whatever, and you're going, man, I don't know, or even a couple of kids, it's like I've been there, and that's what was the genesis of what we do today.
That's unreal, man. You guys been married how long?
32 years. I think we're coming up on 32.
And I mean, I can hear it in your voice. You love your wife.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I will say this too. It's been, we both are very clear about this. The most difficult relationship of all of our kids. We're in the relationship business at Crazy Cool Family. We teach men and women how to do family relationships. But for us, the marriage was the hardest one because we're so different. And
Mm.
and with seven kids, there was a lot of distractions. And so, really, I would say that I love my wife. My wife is amazing. So much of the stuff that I teach at Crazy Cool Family came from her. I tell men a lot, if you'll become a student of your wife instead of her critic, you'll be amazed what you learn about family because our wives are usually more relationship oriented. But man, we've been through some stuff, not stuff like divorce and stuff like that, but I mean just relational challenges, but it's really been a great effort because today we have a better relationship than we've ever had, and it's one of the things I tell men a lot. There's always hope for your marriage. When two people decide to follow Jesus, God can do anything with any relationship, any marriage.
Man, that's really good. I definitely I feel that one. When you say you guys are very, very different, like how so? What do you mean?
Oh gosh, how are we alike would be a better question.
Well, maybe we go
But
there
yeah,
instead.
no, no, but yeah, that would be an easier question. But yeah, I mean, she's an introvert. I'm more of an extrovert. She's a feeler. I'm a thinker. She is. I like systems. She likes, relationships a whole lot more. I like, and I'm not super structured. I mean, probably in the grand scheme of things, I am, but not like super that way. But there's just a lot of differences where, um, I like outdoors. She likes the finer things in life. Just so many things that are different with us. The commonality is we love family. The commonality is we love Jesus. The commonality is we have fun and love to laugh and love to be a part of things. But so many things are different with our personality. She's a 2 on the Enneagram. I'm a 3. A 3, maybe 3 to a 7, where I'm much more visionary and achievement oriented. She's much more relational and task oriented. I said that both
That's
relational task. That doesn't sound right, but she is. She's more in the moment, I guess, is the way I'd put that instead of task.
so interesting. I just took the Enneagram about 6 months ago, and I'm a three wing two, and so I'm a little bit of you and a little bit of her. So which is
Yeah.
kind of interesting. But for you guys, you've been married now for 3 decades, and we've got a lot of guys who are in the audience who've been married for 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 15. It's all over the board. So it's rare actually that I get the opportunity to talk with someone who's been married as long as you have, has had as many kids as you've had, and that you completely, admit that you guys are very, very different. The story that I'm telling myself is that, hey, our differences probably reared its head in different ways. If you were to look back on the marriage and your relationship with her, it probably reared its head and maybe even it could be positive ways, could be negative ways, but it's just like they emerged to the surface. And I would love for you to just share what were some indications early on that maybe we're like, hey, we're just not the same people. And I know for a lot of people, I hear this a lot, especially like in our marriage classes, like we're just not the same people. We're just so different. And they leverage that as a reason of why they're just not getting along. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, no, 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 that doesn't actually have to be. Me or you like me, my wife and I are totally different. And we have a lot in common, but we're totally different people, right? Totally different personality types. She always tells me, she's like, I don't know how you do what you do on the
Right.
microphone. Like I would stay as far away from that as I possibly could. I do not want any part of that. I don't know how you even like do that. But, and that's one of several differences we have. So what advice would you have? So really a two-part question. How did this rear its head early on in your marriage? How did you overcome that and make it into more of a positive?
I'm going to give you two things that I'm going to answer the second question first and give you two things I think that will help answer the first question, and that is number one, at some point we realized like into the first decade of our marriage, there was a key marker point season, if you will, where we realized that we were trying to make each other into ourselves. So I
Oh,
was
wow.
trying to systematize my wife and she was trying to relationalize me. Okay. And my wife will say that she kept trying to turn me into a hairy woman. And so, and
Oh my
so
God.
that and because she wanted me to feel like her, react like her, and see things the way she saw them. I, on the other hand, wanted to if I we did this all with the best interest in mind.
Yeah.
We're not being manipulative. We're not being hurtful. I'm just like, honey, if you would just let me systematize you a little bit, and then your life will be better. And she's like, if I'll relationalize you a little bit, you'll be better. And we're like, and both of us, and so at some point we realized, in that first decade of marriage, that we don't need two Dons and we don't need two Suzannes. That's not good for the marriage. It's not good for our family. What if we celebrate the differences in each other and we see each other and we really try to make each other the best version of ourselves versus trying to create two Dons or two Suzannes? All right. So that was a big revelation for us. The second one comes like 22 years into marriage. And I'm saying, that kids are getting out of the house and things are changing. And I'd love it if every guy here that's been married for 2 years could get this now, what I didn't get till year 22, but it's huge. The first one's huge too. The second one is also huge. I said, we had gotten to the point where we were stable in our relationship, but there were certain areas we wouldn't go into because when we got there were conflicts that happened that we didn't get resolution to. So we kind of were in two safe places in our marriage where we wouldn't really, does that make sense? Where there was certain things we wouldn't talk about, certain things we wouldn't do, and certain levels of intimacy that wasn't there, not physical intimacy, more relational intimacy. And I was praying about this, and I just said, God, I don't want this for our marriage. We both knew we wanted more, but we didn't know how to get there. And I said, Lord, I want more from my marriage. And God said, what are you willing to do? And I said, what do you want me to do? And he said, and he directed me to Philippians 2. And in Philippians 2, it's a great passage. It says that consider others more than yourselves. And in all your relationships, be like Christ Jesus, who, even though he was God, did not consider equality with God something to be obtained. I'm paraphrasing this, but became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name. God brought me to that passage and he said, what's your most important relationship? I said, my wife. He said, are you willing to die to everything to see your marriage go forward? My next question was, well, what about her? What about it? Is she going to die too? Is this double death or is this just single death? And basically the Lord just said, I'm not answering that question. I want to know, and I'm not guaranteeing, you may sacrifice for the next 30 years for her. And I said, well, what about when I go over there and do things, sometimes I get hurt, because I go over and I try things and she doesn't do what I want her to do or whatever. He goes, I got your answer for that. He said, when that happens, when you get hurt, you come back to me and I will heal you because I am bigger than any hurt that your wife can dish out. I'll promise you that I will heal you, and through your identity in me and through my love for you, I will always heal you, but I won't promise you that she'll change. What do you want to do? And I felt like I just it was this marker moment, he said, you can either go down the path and you'll keep your relationship the way it is, or you can dive into the hard things, and let's see what happens. And so, and I did. I just decided to dive off, and it literally, Larry, it was 2 or 3 years before I felt like she responded. 2 or 3 years.
Was that, tell us about, that had to be frustrating.
Well, I mean, it is. But I mean, like, for example, and I didn't really tell her that, oh, honey, I'm doing this big task for you, because I felt like I wasn't supposed to share it with her. It was me and God going on an adventure together. And the frustrating thing is that what would happen is in our relationship is, that I would say things that I wanted to change, and I felt like that what would happen is she would flip it back to me. If you would just be different, then this would happen, and then I would frustrate her. It would cause conflict, and nothing would be accomplished except I got in a fight with my wife. And I didn't, but I just felt like that I just kept diving into those, and so what I did over time was I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't go certain places and certain conversations, but I started to go there and started to step into things. And sure enough, there was some pain, but God was also very faithful in that it took me to a new step in my relationship with God. And, but over time and what I learned is my passiveness. So many times I would not approach things with my wife thinking I was taking care of her, thinking that I'm just not going to share my hurt because I'm taking care of her. But in reality, she saw that passiveness as I didn't care. So one of the things that happened was over time, as I started stepping into more things and really just almost fighting the battle, if you will, she started seeing that I really do care. And that was a message to her that I was trying to dive in and do things. And over time, it made her go, you know what? I want this too. And so we actually so she started to step into it. There were some breakthroughs we had. We actually hired a couple to coach us as well. We've had a coach for the last 5 years. And we meet with them every couple of weeks. And from that, today, our marriage is 100 times better. I mean, it wasn't bad before. It was very functional and very good, and we enjoyed each other in so many ways, but we have just taken it to the new level, and we can talk about things with an intimacy that we've never had. Long answer to your question, but those two things are super important, I think, to one, celebrate the differences. And then as a man, what are you willing to do? Are you really willing to fight for that marriage? And when you fight, quote unquote, sometimes we think that fighting's always bad, but in reality, sometimes when we fight in a good way, then we can have breakthrough.
So I agree with everything you're saying, because I've experienced these similar things myself, especially like even in my faith walk, right? Also, I remember being in the camp, and this is the question I pose to you. Men are extreme in nature, meaning, we're going to go 90 miles an hour in the car, or we're not going to leave the garage, right? We're either going to go to the gym for 2 hours, or we're not going to work out at all, right? We're going to run the marathon. We're going to run the marathon, or we're not even going to get out, or we're not even going to put our shoes on, right? So how men sometimes, how we go about marriage, right? And I love this point you came to in your marriage where you prayed about it. And the theme I'm really pulling from you is that there's surrender here. And I just interviewed Granger Smith last week, and, his story of losing his son. He's one of the biggest country western singers, on the planet. He lost his son back in 2019, has completely revamped his life, but he had this moment of surrender, and that's that's a word that doesn't sit well with us as men. But the way that Granger really put it, and I've never heard it put quite this way, is it's power under control. That's what surrender is, power under control. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. He's like, think about it. He's like, when back in, early times when we had to tame horses, right? We had to break horses in order for a rider to be able to ride this horse. Well, it's always like the Mustang, right? The most fierce, the one that's the most stubborn, the most wild, the ones that just want the control, and they will fight you and fight you and fight you. And then when they surrender, well, they're actually not surrendering like, hey, you're more powerful than me. They're actually like, I'm going to surrender this control, but I am still a powerful animal, and I'm going to go with you to the death. That's the mentality of a Mustang, right? And all that power under control. So that's one really cool way to look at surrender. And I see you doing that when you had this moment, right? When you read
Mhm.
Philippians and when you had this moment with God. Now, what I think a lot of people might take from that is, well, if I surrender and I do that and I do my part and I'm a man, well, then, you know, it's kind of okay if she walks all over me. And
Right.
I don't think that's right either. I
No,
really
that's
don't. And I
no,
think,
I don't either.
and that's where I think a lot of men will take this to an extreme. Well, if I'm surrendering and I'm going to be the man, I'm going to do this. Well, then, I just got to take whatever she gets me. And, really, quite frankly, what we teach is no, you really don't. You still
Hmm.
have to you still need to operate with core values like respect, integrity, right? How we treat each other, how we talk to each other, like even the voice tones we use with each other, right? There's got to be guardrails in this relationship that we quite frankly don't deviate from. There can't be any name calling, right? Things like that I
Yeah.
think men, when they think about this, like, hey, I'm going to go about this and whatever she throws at me, that's really okay. I don't know if it's okay. What do you think
Well,
about that?
and actually, I think that I'm so glad you brought that up because, man, this is gold, guys, what you're hearing from Larry, because that's what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Christian men's circles and in this, even in society today, it's like, where men are emasculated so often.
Yep.
It's like you just take what they give you. My brother used to tell me, just do what she tells you. That was the secret to marriage. I'm like, well, it was funny to me because, and I did that in so many ways. As a servant of the Lord, we're supposed to just get beat up by our wives, and that's honestly what I was doing. And the challenge the Lord gave me through Philippians 2 was, and many times I would do that to back up a minute because one, I didn't want to hurt my wife. And two, I thought I was being a servant. And, you know, but yet when I started to, in effect, kind of fight clean and stand up for myself more, and like you say, go into it with, but the problem is what a lot of men do. I talk to a lot of men that just can't take getting the disapproval of their wives. It
Yeah.
really hurts them. And I'm like, who's your most important love of your life? Is it your wife? Is it your wife, or is it God? And I had to really challenge that in my life because, and I said, if, in other words, if I do something that's right, but it hurts my wife's feelings, but I know I'm right before God, I've still done the right thing. Just because my wife disapproves of it doesn't mean it's wrong. My ultimate authority is God, and I had really let my wife become my authority in so many ways, and it made me passive. But actually, surrender can mean going after it more. Is that making sense?
It makes total sense to me. But I had to learn some of these. I had to learn some of these skills, the hard way. And working with as many men as we do, literally on the daily, this topic does come up, and it's really giving men. So let me give you. Can I give you an example of what I'm talking about?
Sure.
So, I had this. I've had. I didn't have a moment in time where I've been like, oh wow, like look at that, look what I'm doing there. That really sucks. That's not right. I shouldn't be, saying that, doing that, operating like that in my marriage, right? And you go and you operate differently. But and before doing all this work, I always thought exactly like you. Like I almost can't stand when I ask men who aren't a part of what we do. And I ask these questions out of genuine curiosity because I love learning from everybody. Everybody. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care who you are, what you do, what your viewpoint are, what your political affiliation is. I'm just genuinely curious and I want to learn from every person that I get in, that I'm around. And then when I ask men, who've been married for like a really long time, like yourself, I've been married for 20 years, but like, been married for a long time. I'm like, hey, what's the secret of marriage? And they'll be like, she's always right. And never, and I'm just, and I look at that and I'm like, that's not right. That's not right.
Yeah.
And to have that view is, I don't think is appropriate. And let me back up for a second. So Jessica and I, like you, we went through some therapy, we went through coaching, and basically, our coach told us, they're like, you have to have an SOP for how you operate and communicate within your marriage, and even how you argue, right, or how you resolve conflict. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, well, what do you mean? He's like, you have to come up with rules of engagement that neither one of you ever deviate from. I'm like, okay, so we did. So one of them is we never call each other a name. I'm proud to say that Jessica and I have never called each other a name as long as I've known her. We've never called each other a name. It's one thing that I can, other relationships I've had, like, oh, you're an asshole or you're a bitch. And, I'm just like, and even saying that, like, I couldn't say that to my wife ever, no matter how angry I was, like, cause that's not how I view her. Another guardrail is we do not scream. We do not yell, right? So even if we're having conflict, we talk exactly like you and I are talking. Another guardrail is, and this one I think is a relationship killer. Never ever bring up past transgressions to the present. So if I've done something wrong or she's done wrong, oh yeah, well, you did this that one time.
Yeah.
It could be like 10 years ago, it could have been yesterday. Never bring up past transgressions that have been forgiven into the current. So we don't do that either. But I mean, those are just a few. But I think that's one thing that couples miss is like, well, what are our rules of engagement? What are the guardrails? If we're looking at this like we're driving on the road and they're guardrails and we're not going to go off the shoulder, what do the guardrails say? Right?
Yeah. And I think so. A couple of things that I think are really important in what you said. And I want to go back to your analogy, your surrender analogy with the horse. So if you think about, all right, and this really relates to what I want to challenge men with today. If you think about, we would love, I rarely talk to men that say, I don't care about my relationship with my wife, or I don't care about my relationship with my 4-year-old or my 17-year-old or whatever it is. Every man I talk to pretty much says, I value and desire a great relationship with my wife and my children. Would you agree? I mean, with the men you talk to?
100%.
So, and I tell men, think about this analogy. Okay. You use the horse analogy in surrender. So all through our lives with technology and with culture where it is, what technology and culture and everything is saying is that, the key to life is to be free, is to think what you want, do what you want. Just if you think about that thoroughbred analogy, the key is that, everybody just does, the horse just frolics out there in the field and runs around and does whatever they want. And that's the key to life. That's the key to however you want to, whatever you want to do. Well, a Christian says, no, the best way to live life is to get under the bit and bridle of the Lord and to surrender to his ways. And then what happens is God becomes your rider. And you are the thoroughbred, or your relationship is the thoroughbred. God wants to ride that horse into the adventure of life. And surrendered correctly, that is going to be an adventure that's going to be thrilling and exciting and the best way to live your life. So often,
Such a
let's
good analogy, by the way.
take the
Such a good
parent and
analogy.
let's take this to marriage or particularly parenting. What we want to do is we want to either one, pursue this frolicking out in the field. Everybody does what they want and nobody has any surrender, or we want to keep everybody in the barn. We don't want, when we want to say, we can't do anything. We want to protect everything. And so the best way to live life is under all these protections and fears. That's not the way God wants us to live. And so, but yet, just like, because it's easier in the barn, we're safe in the barn, everything is there in the barn. When we ride, we got to go learn some things. We got to
Yeah.
go adventure. And that's what I feel like is missing with men a lot is what I call our second focus. And that is that we have to learn to do relationships. When they asked Jesus what was most important in Matthew 22, but you remember that scripture, he says the first one is to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And that's discipleship. That's what men do. We learn to love God. But he says, but he wouldn't let him. He could have just stayed with one command, but he didn't. He said, no, there's two. And the second is like it. We love our neighbor as ourselves. All right. The second's like it. That means we love with the same heart, soul, and mind that we love Jesus. But so many men, when you say, okay, how's your marriage doing? Well, I'd like it to be a lot better. Do you know how to get there? No, I don't. I didn't either. What about that relationship with your 15-year-old? How would you like? Well, man, he frustrates me to no end. Do you want that to be better? I'd love for it to be better. How do you get there? I don't know. And so what I do is I go hunt or I go drink or whatever because I don't know how to handle those relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's when we don't know exactly what to do. And man, I used to be in this camp big time. It's easier to numb it out and not think about it than
Yeah.
it is to face it. Like that's actually the easy way. Now listen, I'm not raining on anybody's parade who wants to throw back a few beers. I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
What I am saying is you need to look deep within and say, why are you doing this? Is it to escape something or is it to enjoy? Like, listen, if it's to enjoy, then, great. I mean, I just got off of a 365-day no alcohol challenge with 20 other guys in our group, which we just did that we just graduated that last week, which was really cool. But it really made me, look in the mirror of like, well, why was I drinking to begin with? Was it to numb things out? And I'll be real honest. It was rare, but time to time, yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, it's been a really tough day.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I just don't want to deal with like the craziness of this or that or, whatever. Right. And it's, you have a few drinks to like, oh, I'm just having a few drinks to relax. Right. And luckily, like I looked in the mirror and I wasn't doing that often, but it was there every now and again. But I think that there's a lot of people out there and I get it. I totally understand it because for the first 10 years of my marriage and my life, I got drunk a lot.
Right. Right.
I would justify it because I'd like look in the mirror and be like, well, I'm pretty fit, like it's not like I'm like a slob and drinking every night and I've got a successful job. I can hold up my job, but like I was more of a weekend warrior, but it was like for the reasons it was to escape the things that I was dealing with. Right.
Well,
So I
and
think
that,
you
that
really
can
got to look
be,
at the intention.
yeah. And so often, I mean, I think that when I talk to men a lot, it's like, um, it's like it's like the Christian, the church or whatever is trying to say, don't drink or don't go deer hunting, don't play fantasy football. I'm like, wow, no. God, I think God loves for us to, I love to fly fish, for example, and I love
Same.
to go out and find a river and fly fish and go and enjoy that. But years ago, when I had those four girls, I realized a couple of things that's become the passion of my life. That I realized that two things. One, I was going to have a big impact on my daughters and my wife for that matter. But I mean, particularly, but I realized I was going to have a big impact on my daughters. And the second thing I realized is I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do the relationship piece of things. And so, and I'm so glad that somebody enlightened me to that when I was that age. And it doesn't really matter what age you are. I mean, everybody has family relationships they can improve. But at that time, I'm so glad it happened at that time because I went on this journey to figure out. All I did was, it didn't. I still went fly fishing. I still learned to play golf. I still had a career. I still did all. Was involved in things and I actually ran marathons at one point, but I totally agree with you. Like we either do one or the other. We go all out or not. I'm totally, but but in the meantime, I also learned how to do relationships, and I spent a lot of time figuring it out. And it's today I use the analogy of a Rubik's cube because if you think about a Rubik's cube, we all see Rubik's cubes, but we don't know how to do them. Only 5% of the world knows how to do them. But my boys started doing them and they solved them and they said, hey, I said, wow, that's cool. I want to learn how to do a Rubik's Cube. And they said, Dad, well, there's certain algorithms, there's instructions, 8 different algorithms you do to learn how to do a Rubik's Cube. And so today, because I had the desire to learn how to do a Rubik's Cube, I chose to learn and apply the algorithms. Today, I can solve a Rubik's Cube. Okay, I'm one of the 5% now instead of one of the 95%. Well, guess what? The same thing happens with relationships. If you learn the right algorithms out of God's word to do relationships well, any man can dramatically improve their family relationships. I mean, with all the men you're talking to, wouldn't you agree with that statement?
Oh, 100%.
That there are things you can learn, and if we choose to focus, that's why I call it the second focus. Because the first focus, even if you're a secular guy, even if you don't believe in God, your first focus needs to be to have the healthiest version of yourself. But so we choose to do that in the Christian context of surrendering to God. But even then, the second focus for any man should be family relationships because it's going to bring you the greatest. I tell people all the time, I got 7 kids, now 4 sons-in-laws, about to have a daughter-in-law for the first time, and 6 grandkids. And family is the easiest thing I do every day. Why? Because the relationships are there. Over the last 25 years, and if you'd have seen me as a 5-year dad, you'd be like, how in the world did you ever get to where you are today? But I
If
mean,
I would have
because,
seen you as a 5-year-old, is that
yeah,
what
the
you're saying?
5-year dad. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I backtracked from that one real quick.
uh,
But yeah, but if
Man, you
you'd have
became a
seen,
dad really soon in life, man.
exactly. If you'd have seen me as a dad at 5 years, at 5 years into marriage and into parenting, you'd have been like, how did you do it? But it's
Oh yeah.
because we learned over time, just like your first 10 years of marriage and family, you've learned a lot talking to all these men and studying this stuff. And really what we're doing today, Larry, is, my passion. I love the work you do. You help men in every area. You're a men's focused ministry that helps men become men. I mean, where we focus and where God's chosen to me in life is to help men in the family relationship category. How do you build, and for me, it was like this. When I had those 4 daughters and maybe a son or whatever, one time I looked at it, I said, I am not losing this game. I don't even know if I know what winning looks like, but I dang sure see what losing looks like. I see dysfunctional parents with their kids and kids making all kinds of weird decisions and all this stuff. And I could see the culture and technology becoming worse and worse. I said, God, I don't know how to win this game, but I dang sure want to win. And I want to learn how to win. And I feel like that's what we do now is we teach men and parents how to win at family, because, and you think, okay, we're not supposed to win in Christian world. Well, why does Paul say we run the race so as to win the prize? There is a prize out there. God wants the best for us, but every man, and I think just like that Rubik's Cube, I used to look at it and go, there's no way I can figure this out. And so I would either get frustrated with it or I would set it aside. I'm either going to put it on the shelf or I'm going to get mad at it. And I think that's what men do a lot is with our family relationships. Just like, we can't figure it out. So we either get mad about it and try to control it and try to, bully our way through it, or we get passive. Well, what about, give me a third, let's get a third alternative. Let's go learn how to do it and make it the second focus of our lives. Let's make being healthy with God first, but being healthy with our family second. And that's where Crazy Cool Family and what I'm doing with my mission in life, that's what I want to do for the next, as long as God will give me, is help men learn to do that.
And I love that. I love this learn together thing. Do you mind if I just share a quick story with you, and then I want to get to some of the things you're doing over there, Crazy Cool Family, and so how you're going to be helping guys and stuff like that.
Yep.
But so I'm writing a book right now. It's called The Spirit of Fatherhood. And by the way, if you would have ever have if you would have told me a year ago, even, hey man, in 1 year, you're going to ink a book deal and you're going to write a book called The Spirit of Fatherhood, which is more of a Christian based lens of how to go about being a father and husband, I would have laughed. I would have totally laughed. But I really think all of these things happen for a reason. I'll kind of share the story with you. So
Yep.
last September 2022, I inked a book deal with a different publisher, and I wrote a book called The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. The book is completely done, has been for a year. It is designed, the interior, the cover, the ISBN number, like everything's done, totally done, editor and everything. 6 weeks before the publisher was supposed to publish the book, he declared bankruptcy, and
Oh no.
I only found out because one of my friends and former podcast guest Anthony Trucks was an author under him as well, and I heard this from Anthony, and I was like, wait a second. I was like, who's your publisher? And he told me, and I'm like, dude, that's my publisher. He's like, and he just started laughing. He's like, you better go have a conversation. So I did. I called him. I called the CEO. I'm like, hey, man, I just heard this. Is this true? He's like, yeah, we've told all of our current authors. We haven't told the ones who are coming out with stuff yet, but yeah, that's true. And I was like, oh, geez. So he's like, listen, I can either help you self-publish this, or I can just sign the book rights back over to you. I was like, just sign the book rights back over to me. So then I hired an agent, which I never thought I'd have an agent, which is kind of cool. And then she loved the book, and she's like, I'd love to shop this to publishers. She's been in the game for 25 years. So she shopped publishers. You know, here's what I didn't really realize about publishers is that they really, really want their finger on the dial of what goes in those books,
Right.
the editors and stuff like that. I didn't know that. And so anyway, we shopped a couple of publishers, got a couple, offers. We turned them down. Well, then one came back and they're like, we love the book and we want to publish it, but we want you to write a new one first. And I'm like, what? And I was like, what?
Wow.
I was like, dude, this book was supposed to come out a year ago, man. This is like the easy button. It's already done. All you guys got to do is put your name on it, right? And they're like, no, we just published a book called The Beauty of Motherhood. It's a spiritual Christian-based view on motherhood. And we've been looking for an author for a long time to write one on fatherhood. We've been following you for a long time. We know you're new to this faith journey, and we want you to write a similar book. And I just like looked at this guy on Zoom and I was like, you're kidding, right? And he's like, no, I'm serious. I was like, dude, you got the wrong guy. I am not that guy. I was like, yes, I'm deep in my faith walk, but dude, I am so new to it. Like, I am not cut out to write this book. And they said, stop. That's why we want you to write it, because you're relatable.
Yeah.
It's because you're humble and you're a student of this stuff and you're learning this stuff still. Every book that is a Christian-based book, it's like they're preaching from a pulpit. We think you can write a book as if you're in the trenches with the reader. I was like, that I can do.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That I can do, because like I can do that. I was like, because I'm totally a student of this. And they're like, well, that's the way we want you to write the book. I was like, I can do that. So I started writing it. And what I can tell you is that there's something really incredible about saying, let's go learn together. Because I just got done writing a chapter about how to create an environment where your kids want to learn about these things, not the words forced. They're forced to learn it, right?
Right.
And I wrote this chapter recently, and it was a reflection on like why I didn't go to church regularly in years past, or why I would spend years away from church, or why I would never pray with my kids, or why I would never pray myself. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I don't know enough and I'm not worthy. And quite frankly, I still feel that way. But I had a great spiritual mentor of mine say, Larry, you got it all wrong. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're the dad. 80% of kids will attend, or 90% of kids will attend church if dad does.
Right.
Right. Which he's like, and more, you're the spiritual leader in your family. I'm like, I'm not up for that. And they're like, well, you kind of are. And he basically said, what would it look like, instead of feeling like you have to know it all or you're not worthy enough? What would you say? What would it be like if you went to your kids and be like, I'm totally new to this faith walk. I really don't know what I'm doing, and I really want to learn with you. Well, how does that feel? I was like, that feels really freaking fantastic to me. And here's what I can tell you after now doing this for a year and the way that I'm writing this book, this whole like, let's just learn together because I don't know it either. That has been one of the most freeing decisions to be like, and you're talking about marriage, you're talking about relationships or parenting, like,
Hmm.
hey, I don't know, but let's go learn together. That is such a cool collaborative approach that feels really darn good. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, one of the things that's really how that's really what I learned. What, in Deuteronomy, it talks about, we talk about the Lord along what we call along the way. It's when you lie down, the scripture says, it's Deuteronomy 6, I think. It just says, teach them these commands when you lie down, when you rise up. It's just along the way. It's a journey of life and no matter where, I love it that, no matter where you are, really all you're doing is taking a next step on your journey with Jesus and helping your kids take a next step on their journey with Jesus. That's it. I mean, it's not about how, that difference in what you know versus they know. I mean, I learn from my kids all the time. Now we have, what's happened in our house over time is, one of the things we learned is just, what if you have God conversations in your home? So all we're doing is just talking about where the Lord's working in our lives and what we're learning. Well, guess what? Now over 20 years, what's happened is God conversations are normal in our home now, because we just modeled that for our kids. And I think that's so good that you're just saying, hey, I'm not going to try to be a know-it-all. All I'm going to try to do is talk about Jesus and talk about what he's doing in my life, and then let that be a part of our fabric of our home.
I love that, man. Just having the open conversation about it, and just being able to be more curious about it. I don't, Don, I don't know how you were raised, and I don't want to get too far off topic because I really want to talk more about, what you're doing over at Crazy Cool Family. But I think a lot of people get, the religious thing, the Christian thing, the spiritual thing, whatever it is you want to label it or call it. Some people have had really bad experiences with it, and meaning like even
Mm-hmm.
from family. Like I remember growing up, and if my grandmother knew that I didn't go to church, and I'm talking like 9 years old, right? She'd be like, you're going to hell, right? And I'm like, what? And
Yeah.
she's like, yeah, you're going to hell. It's a mortal sin to miss church. You should never miss church. And it was so much, it was all these levers of shame and guilt and all this other stuff. And it just, I looked at you growing up, I looked at church as like, well, I better do it or I'm terrible. And then when I wouldn't do it, well, I'm just terrible. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's, you talk to other people's experiences, and some people's experiences are really extreme, or like, I mean, gosh, man, you hear these stories. I mean, like, I'll be really honest, man. When I was in fifth grade, I'll never forget this. Never. And I was an altar boy at my Catholic grade school, and I was a server, right? And this priest, man, he had it out for me. He did not like me. I wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
bad kid, but I wasn't a troublemaker, but I didn't do really good in school. I just was kind of like, like whatever. And he just didn't like me. And he made it very well known. And I'll never forget, one day he told me to go get the candles somewhere when I was getting ready for the mass that day. And I said, okay, where are they? And he said, and I didn't hear what he said, but I thought I heard what he said. And he was very stern, very cold. And I'll never forget, I walked out of like the sacristy, which is, if you're Catholic, that's where the priest gets prepped for everything. Walked out of that. And then I made a left, and all my classmates were lined up outside, and they were going into church. And all of a sudden, I felt someone grab me by the neck, like literally choke, like a chokehold. And I thought it was an upper class. I thought it was like an eighth grader who was bullying me or something like that at first. And he drug me back into the sacristy. He shoved me up against the wall by my shirt, and he got on my face and he said, I said the candles were over there. You never listen. And he's just yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right before church. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, and it took everything I had. I was like, I can't cry. I can't cry. Like, he yelled at me, and I was mortified because it was in front of everybody I went to school with. So then I had to face all these kids when I went back to class, like, oh, Father so-and-so, look what he did to you. And there, I went up to him. That was a Wednesday, and I was supposed to also do mass with him on Friday. And I was just so angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked up to him, and I was, and I got there early just to spite him. And I said, I quit. I'm not doing mass with you today. And I was just like, that was my way of like, I'm leaving you hang.
Right.
Right. And he just pushed, he's like, oh, so just another situation where little Larry gives up on life, huh? And
Uh,
like, and I walked away from that, man. I was so angry. And I remember I was 10. It was 38 years ago.
mhm.
And, but I think people, they have these past experiences that I think that are really unfortunate. And I think they could sometimes really be avoided. And, if there's a way for people just to get curious about it again with no expectations and no guilt, but just to be curious about their faith, I think that would help a lot of people.
Yeah. And just, think about so often, think about your grandmother. Do you think that, and I'm so sorry that the church did that to you with that priest. Man, I just, I think that's, but going back to your grandmother, your grandmother loved you.
Yeah.
And
I know
so
she, yeah.
my point is that so often as dads and husbands, we are messing up with the best intentions.
Mhm.
And I'm just want to tell dads and husbands out there, I mean, that we get it. You're not trying to mess up your 5-year-old, but it's happening.
Yeah.
And maybe in various degrees it's happening. Well, what you're giving them, Larry, is through relationship, and what I'm trying to give them too is some things we've learned along the way that we are trying to pass back along. At some point in time, the way Crazy Cool Family got birthed is God says, I've given you a gift. I've given you people in your life that have shown you a different way, my ways of doing discipleship and relationship. Okay. And it's given you a great family, a family that loves the Lord, loves each other. If you were to go into my home, if you were to see where we, see us interact, you'd say, wow, that's really cool. And it is, it's a real blessing to my life. It's not perfect, but it is definitely on the right track. But it's because of the people that invested in me before, and because what I do and what my wife does and what my kids do is we invest in each other. And so, but often dads and husbands are doing these things they just don't know. And they have great intentions, but and it's like, how can we help them adjust and overcome? And many times we're acting out of our wounds. We're acting out of those 10-year-old things that happen that lay tracks in our brain that we got to get somebody to help us dislodge those tracks. And it's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Think about this. Romans 8 says that we are children of the King. That when it says that you are no longer an orphan, you are a child of the King. That we are no longer slaves. We are, and so often we've got to understand that more, that who we are is what God loves us unconditionally when we come to faith. And so now we can act out of that. We don't have to act like an orphan anymore, because we have all the rights and and privileges of a child of the King. Think about how that child of the King acts. He acts with faith, with confidence, because he knows that the King of the universe is behind him. Well, that's what we're trying to get men to understand and to dive into, so they can run that race well and go out and develop those relationships in a way that is healthy, that's not so controlling and so full of fear in so many ways.
I think that fear base, right? Because that's a big one that we do as parents, or even in relationships in general, right? It's
Yeah.
not chasing what it is that we want, it's that we are actually trying to prevent or avoid what we don't want. I just interviewed Gary John Bishop, who wrote the book Grow Up, Become the Parents That Your Kids Deserve. And he talks about, how we as parents, we will discipline, we will communicate, and we will do things. And yeah, I mean, God bless my grandmother, right? I mean, she was only doing probably how she was raised, right? And perhaps she was like, I love you so much and I care about your faith walk so much. This is the lever I want to pull in order to
Mm-hmm.
get your attention. But it really is because I care about you, not because I want to make you feel like total crap, right?
Right.
But you're right. It's this fear based approach. And I always, I really, really challenge men, and I challenge myself with this every day, because there are times where I'm about to say something, I'm about to do something as a dad, and I'm like, is this my fear talking? Or is this something that I do I want to be effective in a positive way, right? Which one is it? And a lot of times we default to that fear-based approach, which quite frankly is it can be effective short term,
Hmm.
right? But what is the long-term outcome of that? It's not good.
Yeah, and
It's not good at all.
the two fears that men have a lot is how I'm going to look and how my kid's going to turn out.
Yep.
And when we, it's one of the biggest things I learned as a parent. Again, thank God it was early in my parenting, and that I say early, the first several years. And again, I learned it from my wife. I would say to her, why don't you get on to the kids more? And she would say, well, I said, maybe if you got onto them more, we would have a better, we would, things would go better. They would obey better or whatever. She says, I believe God has them and I believe they're going to turn out great. And I was like, wow, I don't know if I believe that. And I flipped my belief because I believe, one of the things I believe about life is belief determines behavior. That
Yep.
who we are determines what we do, and who we believe we are determines what we do. And I started to say, you know what? She's right and I'm wrong. I need to believe more in what God's going to do than rather what the enemy is going to do to them. And it really did flip the way I thought about parenting them, because now I started to parent more and more out of belief versus out of fear, more out of, and actually what First Peter will say, I think it's in First Peter, that the opposite of fear is love. That when
Mm-hmm.
we believe in God's love for us, that He has it for us, we believe we are children of the King, then we believe that things will. And it's not just like this false belief or just a I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It's not a belief that is that's just pie in the sky belief. It really is a belief having faith that God is
Yep.
going to do great things. And so that was a tremendous change for me that helped me overcome my fear of my kids, not my fear of people thinking I was a bad parent, or the fear that my kids weren't going to turn out right.
Isn't that fascinating?
That it is, and but it takes time.
It
That's why,
does.
and that's why I talk to men about, hey, we're in the relationship change business at Crazy Cool Family, but realize that we got to drip it into you over time, because it really does take time to become, one of the things we teach men a lot is to how to listen. Well, James 1:19 says, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Three statements that every man should know, but is very hard to implement. But you learn how to do it, but you keep practicing. It's like the Rubik's Cube example. You learn the algorithm and you keep practicing it. Guess what? That algorithm comes easy for me now on those Rubik's Cubes. I just flip,
Sure.
flip, 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 and I do it. You know what? Over time, listening becomes easier for me. I ask better questions. I think about things differently, but that didn't happen 15 years ago. It does more today.
That makes total sense. It's simple but not easy, you know,
Well, and
because
that's
it's
the
our
way
deep.
Jesus is. I mean, he's very simple, but he's very profound, and it takes a long time to really get the implementation of what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And the most effective things are simple. The more simple and the more achievable we can make things, the better off we're going to be. Yeah, as we wrap up here, I know we're launching this podcast on December 10th, and you have something really crazy cool. See what I did there? Really crazy cool coming out at the beginning of the year. And I would love for you to share what that is and how men can engage with what you're doing.
Yeah, so it really, Larry, you were a part of this. We started scheduling this podcast, and it's funny how God works. But in the midst of that, all of a sudden, we do talk to men a lot, but we also talk to parents, and we do a lot of things online and through churches and everything else. But all of a sudden I started getting all these events with men, and to invitations to speak to men, just like, this podcast, other events, just going around the country speaking. It's like, wow, where did all this come from? And in the meantime, I was studying the scripture really about this second focus that, when you look at what Jesus said was most important, we've always taught it. This is just a different way to teach it. The first focus being discipleship, the second focus being relationship. And I thought, and as I thought about men, I said, this is especially, and backing up, another thing I'm seeing, I hope you're seeing this too. I'm just seeing a stirring of men. If you remember back many years ago, you may or might not remember, but there was Promise Keepers, where a lot of men got really engaged. There was a move of the Spirit with men to engage with their family, and there was a lot of there was a Colorado football coach started Promise Keepers and all that, and I just feel this stirring of men all around me that want to take, fight back against the culture, fight back against the emasculation of men to lead their families. And so my little part of that is where the God's shown me some revelation is I want to help in 2024. At the end of 2024, I want every man that'll listen to me to say, I have dramatically improved my family relationships. I have dramatically improved my relationship with my wife and my relationship with my children. Whatever, I don't care how old you are, wherever your marriage is, if you got a 3-year-old kid or a 50-year-old kid, every man I know, including me, including you, can improve our family relationships. We got to know, but we got to know the algorithms. We got to know some things. Well, guess what? That's one thing that I can do. If you ask me to shoot a deer, I'm probably not going to be very good at it. If you ask me to, fix a car, I'm probably not going to be very good at it. But if you ask me how to do family relationships, I can show you how to do that. That's something that God has gifted me in. I've studied it for over 2 decades. And so all I want to do right now is get men started in 2024 on the pathway to do that. It doesn't make sense to challenge men to do something if I'm not going to give them the tools to do it. Right? And we have those tools. And as with most men, we got to be simple. And, it's like my buddy Tim Hawkins says, we're like 2 crickets playing racquetball up there. We don't have a lot of depth in our life. We don't have a lot of, it takes simple things. And so what I'm challenging men to do is come with me in the first of the year on a 4-week cohort that is going to start in January. I'll send you the details of it. We're actually still putting the details together because this is a fairly new revelation. But and the way they do that is just go to one email address, dads, DADS, at crazycoolfamily.com. DADS at 3 words, crazycoolfamily, just one family. It's all you have is one family, crazycoolfamily.com. And just give me an email and say, I'm in. That's all you got to do. We'll send you all the details. And it's free. The actual webinar, Zoom group, however we do it, will be free. There will be some materials you can purchase that'll help you in the journey. But it's again, what we want to do. My passion for 2024 is to equip as many men as possible to have great strides in their family relationships. And it's going to be easy. It's going to be simple. It won't be easy because you'll be working on it all year. But I promise you, if you'll apply what we're going to teach you in January, you're going to get to the end of 2024 and you're going to see some significant strides in that relationship with your 5-year-old, with your wife, with your 12-year-old. You're going to figure out some things. It's going to unlock those algorithms so you can have a greater connection with those people you love.
You're doing good work, man. You really, really are. And these things are skills. And I think a lot of us view them as, well, they should, number one, come naturally. And if they don't, then I'm just wrong, broken, or dumb, or whatever else. Or maybe I didn't pick the right person, or maybe I'm not a patient dad, or I was growing up this way, so it's just the way it is. And that's not the way it has to be. I was on a podcast last week called The Married Game with Keith Yackey. And Keith has got this in his office. He's got a giant hammer. And I'm like, he's got all kinds of trinkets in his office. I'm like, what's the hammer? He's like, I used to be a carpenter. I was like, what? Like, he's like, yeah, I went to carpentry school. I was a carpenter for a while. And I was like, wow, it's interesting. But we talked about that hammer on that podcast and how you don't show up to a job site not going through trade school, learning how to be a carpenter with a hammer in your pocket, a couple nails, and you're like, hey, boss, I'm here. I think I can put some things together and be like, all right, well, great. What's your knowledge base? Oh, I have a hammer and I have some nails, and I've hammered a few nails in wood before, and I've got a tape measure. I think I can figure out how to measure stuff. They'd be like, get off my job site right now.
Right.
Like, you're going to be dangerous, right? But the interesting thing is that's how we'll go about relationships, right? We don't even think that those two worlds actually collide. They're like, well, wait a second. So I can actually learn skills to do this and it'll
Absolutely.
work. And the answer to that is yes. You know, so I love what you're
Well, and
doing.
think about this. I
Yeah.
mean, as a final, I know we're wrapping up here, but think about what Jesus did. He took 12, 11 actually, exempt Judas from the deal, unschooled men. But he spent 3 years with them. And from that, and they were always messed up. They always never knew quite where he was coming from. But at the end of the day, they changed the world.
Yep.
The same thing, any man, I believe that any man can win at family if they're willing to do the things just like I did with the Rubik's Cube. I wasn't winning at the Rubik's Cube. I was one of the 95%. Okay. 3 things I did. I had a desire to change. I said, I want to learn how to do the Rubik's Cube. Show me how to do it. There's no way I could have learned it, but once I had my mentors, which were my sons, which is so amazing when they start to teach you how condescending your sons become when they start, oh, Dad, there's no way you'll ever learn how to, okay, I think I've made more money than you in life. I think I can learn how to do a Rubik's Cube, right?
I feel you on that one.
Yeah, it's so funny how they become the most condescending teachers in the world. But then I started to learn and apply and then keep asking questions, just the discipleship relationship. And today, those algorithms come easy to me. That same thing can happen for any man that's willing to step in and have a desire to make the second focus their second focus of life, to do what Jesus did, to follow Jesus's ways, and then just to try. And really what's crazy is you'll watch your kids go, who are you? I mean, literally, they will say, who are you? Where have you come from? And over time, they will respond. So yeah, I love it. I love what you're doing as well. Go to Dad. And really what we'll do is be complimenting what you're already doing, shaping men. I can't wait to see your book come out. Just go to Dad's at crazycoolfamily.com. It'll be in the show notes as well. Simply send me an email and say, hey, I'm in. And then we'll put you on the list. We will give you all the instructions. We'll be talking to you over the holidays, and we'll get you all ready to go for January.
Well, there you go, guys. There you have it. If you head on over to thedadedge.com/452, again, thedadedge.com/452, we'll have all of Don's contact information for you. We'll have that email address in there for you. Just send an email over to Don. Let him know that you're in. Obviously, this man is leading from his heart. He's leading from a ton of experience as well. 3 decades of marriage and also raising 7 kids himself. You know, when it comes to doing things successfully, there are people who have already paved the way, right? We don't have to go out and pave a new road. Somebody has already made the right. Someone is already like yourself, has already paved the way of success. All we have to do is not worry about trying to build our own, but doing the same thing and following on that path. So Don, from my heart to yours, man, you're doing great work. Thank you so much for coming on the Dad Edge podcast. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Appreciate you, man. And anything we can do to support you, man, please let us know.
Will do. Thanks for having us. And yeah, just love what you're doing as well, and so excited to get 2024 kicked off for all the men that you're reaching out with this podcast.
Same, my friend. Gentlemen, enjoy your holidays. Hopefully we'll see you over in Don's webinar at the beginning of the year. Go out and live legendary. Take care.